having considered the unanimous views of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates expressed in its 17th report, find Kristian Firth to be in contempt for his refusal to answer certain questions and for prevaricating in his answers to other questions, and, accordingly, order him to attend at the bar of this House.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Today was a great day for Canadians, but a terrible day for Kristian Firth. A week ago, on March 22nd, Michael Barrett introduced a motion that proposed something that has only happened 5 times in the past century. But before we get into that, we also wanted to celebrate.
As most of you know, Jamil Jivani recently won a landslide victory in the Durham riding by-election by capturing more than half of the popular vote, sending a signal to the other parties that the Conservatives mean business, as well do Canadians.
Today was a very special day for MP Jivani as he had the opportunity to take his seat for the very first time.
Let's take a look.
Order. I have the honor to inform the House that the Clerk of the House has received from the Chief Electoral Officer a certificate of the election and return of Mr. Jivani, member for the Electoral District of Durham.
So I wanted to pause the video here because you see the golden mace in front of them. This is part of the tradition and call it a ritual of becoming a member of parliament. So they stop before the mace because that symbolizes a transfer of power between the king and the elected members of the common people. So they stop before the mace because it kind of symbolizes that that power transfer is occurring for each new member of parliament that is taking their seat for the first time.
Mr. Speaker, it is an honor to present to you Jamil Jivani, the honorable member for Durham. He has taken the oath, signed the roll, and now takes the right to claim his seat.
Honorable member, take his seat.
So that's a great moment for Jamil Jivani. I'm sure he will remember it for the rest of his life.
And it's a proud moment for Canadians as well.
Especially the people of Durham, because now they have a brand new MP replacing Aaron O'Toole. And he's going to bring a valued skill set to the Conservative Party of Canada, and that's going to be sorely needed. And the unfortunate part for Jivani is normally you'd have to wait about 4 years before going to an election again. He's going to have to do that in less than 2. So anyhow, Conservatives add one more MP to a vacant seat, and that's never a bad thing when it comes to votes.
Now let's rewind the clock back to March 22nd of 2024, where Michael Barrett introduced his historic motion.
Speaker, I move, seconded by the member for Calgary-Mindapore, that the House, having considered the unanimous views of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates expressed in its 17th report, find Kristian Firth to be in contempt for his refusal to answer certain questions and for prevaricating in his answers to other questions, and, accordingly, order him to attend at the bar of this House at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on the 3rd sitting day following the adoption of this order for the purposes of A, receiving an admonishment to be delivered by the Speaker, B, providing responses to the questions referred to in the 17th report, and C, responding to supplementary questions arising from his responses to the questions referred to in the 17th report.
Debate. The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Okay, most of you who have been following Northern Perspective have probably watched our live stream coverage of Kristian Firth and his recent testimony at committee, where he was very obstructive, he was very dismissive, and he was very unwilling to answer questions, even saying, oh, well, you know, this is part of an RCMP investigation, despite the fact he was telling committee that the RCMP hasn't spoken to him. So there's a lot of frustration by all parties, including the Liberals, of the fact that he wasn't answering even the softball questions that the Liberals were throwing at him. So then the Liberals were actually forced to ask difficult questions, which Firth continued not to answer. His testimony was followed up by Darren Anthony the next day, which, you know, Darren Anthony seemed to be having more knowledge about swimming pool management than, you know, the operation of his own two-person company, which he was allegedly the chief security officer. So this led to the Conservatives raising this motion of contempt within committee, which was unanimously agreed upon. And I think the Liberals didn't have a choice to do that because they knew that when it came to a vote, the NDP and the Bloc were going to vote with the Conservatives.
So what exactly is contempt of Parliament? Parliament itself defines it as any disregard of or attack on the rights, powers, and immunities of the House and its members, either by an outside person or body, or by a member of the House, is referred to as a breach of privilege and is punishable by the House. So that is the breach of privilege. However, other affronts against the dignity and authority of Parliament which may not fall within one of the specifically defined privileges. Thus, the House also claims the right to punish, as a contempt, any action which, though not a breach of a specific privilege, tends to obstruct or impede the House in the performance of its functions, obstructs or impedes any member or officer of the House in the discharge of their duties, or is an offense against the authority or dignity of the House, such as disobedience of its legitimate commands or libels upon itself, its members, or its officers.
So, what did Kristian Firth do? By not answering the questions and refusing to answer the questions, and even refusing to show up for committee even before that, he was violating the parliamentary privilege of literally every member of Parliament on the OGO committee. So everyone agreed to that at the end of the meeting in which he testified recently. So they essentially submitted in their report to the House of Commons that Kristian Firth had violated the privilege of every MP within the OGO committee, and therefore wanted to find him in contempt of Parliament. So the motion is that the House find him in contempt and summon him to the bar of the House due to the violation of parliamentary privilege. Now, we've explained this before, but it's not something that comes up a heck of a lot. But what is parliamentary privilege? So parliamentary privilege is essentially the right that has been bestowed upon the members of Parliament by Canadians in order to conduct the daily business of government. This means that, you know, they're allowed to vote, they're allowed to ask questions in committee, they're allowed to make statements and submit motions, you know, just carry out their rights as a member of Parliament. So a question of privilege or a violation of that privilege means that something is happening that is preventing a member of Parliament or more from actually executing those duties, which is a violation of, you know, the Parliamentary Acts. So this is what brings us to this. And why is that serious? Because you're effectively blocking the normal operation of the federal government. That's a bad thing. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a question of privilege. Now, What is the bar?
The bar is a brass rod extending across the floor of the chamber inside its north entrance. It is a barrier which uninvited representatives of the Crown, as well as other non-members, are not welcome. The sergeant at arms, or an assistant, sits at a desk on the opposition side of the chamber inside the bar. Now, individuals may be summoned to appear before the bar of the House in order to answer to the authority of the House. If someone is judged to be in contempt of the House, that is, guilty of an offense against the dignity or authority of the Parliament, the House may summon the person to appear and order that he or she be reprimanded by the Speaker of the House and with full authority of the House. They also may be required to answer questions of the members inside the House.
So, as it relates to this, Kristian Firth is, well, that's what the motion is about. It's to summon him to the bar. Now, if Parliament was in session, none of us would be allowed to go past that bar into the House of Commons.
This is why when you saw the clip of Jamil Giovanni being brought into the House, he entered from the north entrance behind the bar and was escorted by Pierre Poilievre, then presented to the House as an MP.
Anyway, so we have a motion from Michael Barrett that is on behalf of the Oco Committee that is summoning Kristian Firth to the House to be admonished and to answer questions. So then what happened on March 22nd is, because this is a question of privilege, everything else stops in parliamentary business, and they immediately have to deal with this question of privilege. So that's why you heard Greg Fergus earlier say, on to debate. So they began to debate, people began to speak, and then later in the day, there was an amendment brought forth by a Liberal, everybody's favorite MP, not Mr. Gerritsen.
I assume that, and I have faith in the member from Leeds, Granville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes, when he genuinely wants to get to the bottom of this, and this is not about political theater as that tended to be. So that's why I stress upon the fact that it is extremely important that we just develop how we will go about conducting the manner in which we call somebody and how questions are asked and how this House will genuinely function. Mr. Speaker, I would like to move an amendment to the motion. I have the amendment here, which I will provide to the clerk after I read it out. It is seconded by the member from Milton, and that the motion be amended by A, deleting the words "at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on the third sitting day following the adoption of this order," and B, adding at the end, quote, "provided that D, it be the instruction of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to study the procedure for questioning Kristian Firth at the bar of the House and report back to the House of Commons with recommendations within 10 days following the adoption of this order, and that Kristian Firth Kristian Firth attend the bar of the House of Commons no later than 3 sitting days following the concurrence in of the report." So what I'm asking for here, in addition to what I'm asking for here, Mr. Speaker, is that we let the Standing Committee very quickly develop the procedure by which we would entertain the individual and proceed with the individual once they get here, and then also adding the words to ensure that the appearance occur within a limited number of time, 3 days, as I indicated.
So, the original motion is intended to get Kristian Firth before the bar as soon as possible. What Gerritsen is suggesting is they actually send this back to committee, but to a different committee, over to PROC, the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. And what he is suggesting is that that committee figure out how they're going to question Kristian Firth within the House. Now, on the surface of this, you can think, okay, maybe that makes sense, but it doesn't really.
Well, it is a possibility after they have accepted the motion to bring Firth to the bar, that is. But it can go a number of different ways.
Yeah. So let's take a look at how something like this would navigate Okay?
So this is the flow chart of what happens when a question of privilege is raised before the House. This is the step that we're at right now. The motion is debatable and amendable, and it takes priority over the other orders of the day. A question of privilege is considered the utmost importance and needs to be resolved as soon as possible. Now, from this stage, there are different steps that we can take. Barrett is suggesting that the motion call for some action in the House, which can then be adopted or defeated.
Now, Garrettson is suggesting that this actually goes to committee. And if it actually goes to committee and then comes back, then it would essentially, jump back in to this box on the left where, the motion is quote unquote adopted, and then it proceeds based on the stipulations within the motion or the amendment. Basically, he's saying once it comes back from committee, then Firth is actually brought to the House.
Well, you can see here on the left, if we do things Barrett's way by calling on the House to complete an action, i.e. bringing Firth before the bar, that's the end of the flow chart if we go that way, if we follow the red path.
Yeah, it skips all of the bureaucracy that is below the step that we're at now.
What Garrettson is suggesting is that we go to the step that says motion is to refer the matter to committee, and then we may have to go through that entire flow chart. That's like the second third of the page there.
So it introduces some significant delay here, and what we're not going to show you is right after he raised that amendment, a member of the bloc stood up and said, I don't think this is a good idea, because what that allows to happen is the opportunity for the Liberals to introduce more amendments to what actually goes on when this is in committee. So it was a really, really good point by the bloc. Again, the bloc has some really strong MPs, just sucks that they're in the bloc. But so the debate continued, and it continued all day on March 22nd. And then it began again this morning on April 8th, and it continued all day until near the end of the day. And there was a lot of passionate speeches in there. And again, we'd love to show you, everything, but there was over probably 10 to 12 hours total of debate on this thing. So we're not going to show you that. But I think over time, the Liberals actually found that nobody was going to be supporting this amendment at all. Like nobody. And what the Conservatives ended up doing is working behind the scenes as debate was going on and trying to get some agreement between all of the opposition parties, and then subsequently throwing that at the Liberals and saying, you guys, do you want to waste more time, or do you want to just move on with this? And then that led to Andrew Scheer standing up and saying this.
Before I go to questions and comments, I have a point of order. The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, the ordinary hour of daily adjournment later this day, or when no member rises to speak, whichever is earlier, the motion on the question of privilege standing in the name of the member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes regarding summoning Kristian Firth to the bar of the House, and the amendment standing in the name of the member for Kingston and the Islands be deemed withdrawn, and B, the House having considered the unanimous views of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates expressed in its 17th report, find Kristian Firth to be in contempt for his refusal to answer certain questions and for prevaricating in his answers to other questions, and accordingly order him to attend at the bar of this House at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions on Wednesday, April 17th, 2024, for the purposes of 1. Receiving an admonishment delivered by the Speaker, 2. Providing responses to the questions referred to in the 17th report, 3. Responding to supplementary questions arising from his responses to the questions referred to in the 17th report, provided that 4. During Mr. Firth's attendance at the bar for the purpose of responding to questions which shall be asked by members, with questions and answers being addressed through the Speaker, A. 10 minutes be allocated to each recognized party for the first and second rounds in the following order. Liberal Party, Conservative Party, Bloc Québécois, and New Democratic Party. B, during the third round, 5 minutes be allocated to each of the recognized parties with an additional 5-minute period for the Green Party. C, within each 10 or 5-minute period of questioning, each party may allocate time to one or more of its members. D, in the case of questions and answers, Mr. Firth's answers shall approximately reflect the time taken by the question. 5, at the expiry of the time provided herein, and after Mr. Firth has been excused from further attendance, the House shall resume consideration of the usual business of the House for a Wednesday. 6, it be an instruction to the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates to consider Mr. Firth's testimony at the bar of the House and, if necessary, recommend further action.
That all those oppose the motion, please say no.
La Chambre a entendu l'énoncé de la motion.
All those opposed to the motion, please say no.
Carried.
Okay, so what happened there? Well, in order to essentially sidestep these concerns, quote unquote concerns raised by the Liberals, what the Conservatives ended up doing is collaborating with the Bloc and the NDP and putting together the quote-unquote rules by which they would be questioning Kristian Firth, which is why the motion ended up longer. And Scheer was talking about that there's going to be 10-minute periods and 5-minute periods, and the different parties would do this and the different parties would do that, and the questions would be posed through the Speaker of the House. So they actually very quickly came up with the rules of engagement as it relates to Kristian Firth, which is what the big concern that Mark Gerritsen raised when he raised his amendment. So they got all the agreement of the opposition parties. Then they took that over to the Liberals and said, here you go. You don't need 2 weeks in committee.
We did it in 5 minutes.
We did it probably a little longer than that, but yeah.
Still, we did it very quickly, and that's what happens when government works together.
So that ended up forcing the Liberals to actually withdraw their amendment, and instead of this being delayed until May, which is when the Liberals were trying to get that done, now this is happening on April 17th, one day after the budget is submitted. Isn't that interesting? So at the end of question period on April 17th, Kristian Firth is going to get his ass handed to him by Parliament.